All right, good evening, everyone. The time is now 5:32, so we're running just a little bit behind, but I think we should still be good. So we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to workshop number 2 in Delaware's Climate Action Plan Virtual Public Workshop Series. Today's workshop will look at potential actions the state can take to maximize resilience to sea level rise. My name is Ian Yu, and I will be acting as your facilitator this evening. We are pleased to have you all here, and we look forward to your input and your questions. This workshop is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on our website at declimateplan.org, along with a closed caption transcript of this workshop. Before we begin, we would like to ensure that everyone's technology is working and address a few housekeeping items. First, if you have any technical issues throughout the workshop, please send a private message through the chat box. The message should be directed to all panelists, and someone will be available to assist you. Please only use the chat box for technical assistance. To access the chat box, click the chat box icon at the bottom of your screen. This will open a new chat window on the right side of your screen. Please note that although the window may indicate that the chat box is a group chat, private replies to you will not be visible to other participants. To close the chat box, click the down arrow at the top left corner of the box and select Close Chat Box. We have also included a URL link to the Zoom Help Center in the chat box as an additional resource. During this workshop, you will also have the opportunity to ask a question or submit a comment related to the content of this workshop. For any questions or comments that do not have to do with technical support, please use the Q&A box. Again, the Q&A box is only meant for questions or comments related to the content of this workshop. Technical support questions should be directed to the chat box. You can access the Q&A box by clicking the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. After you select the Q&A icon, a new pop-up screen will appear where you can submit your question or comment. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can during the live question and answer portion towards the end of our time together. We have over 200 participants that were registered for this workshop, so we may not get to all questions. Additionally, answers to some questions may require more information and thus will not be possible to answer live. If you are calling into the workshop or otherwise do not have access to the Q&A box, you can also email questions to declimateplan@delaware.gov. Again, that's declimateplan@delaware.gov. Please note anything that you type into the Q&A box will be viewable to all participants. In order to create a safe and positive experience for all workshop participants, we will not tolerate any offensive or inappropriate language, nor any kind of hate speech. If such language is used, it will be deleted immediately and the responsible participant will be removed from the workshop and unable to return. We'd also like to give you some tips on using sound in Zoom. If you have any trouble with hearing the audio, you can try restarting Zoom, or you can try switching to using phone audio. If you'd like to switch to phone audio, move your cursor to the bottom of your screen on the left where it says Audio Settings, and click the up arrow. On the menu that appears, select Switch to Phone Audio. This will cause a pop-up box to appear that looks like the one on the screen. Please note that the pop-up box that you see on the screen is just an example box, and the phone number and the meeting information will be different on your screen. If you have any trouble with this, please send a message in the chat box to all panelists, and we will provide you with assistance. If you are only able to join us by calling in this evening, the workshop recording of the full presentation and the polls will be made available for you to view within a week of tonight's workshop. As I mentioned previously, you can also submit your feedback on the proposed actions and any questions that you have to declimateplan@delaware.gov throughout the workshop. Also, as I mentioned previously, Closed captioning is available during this workshop. To view captions, click the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen and select Show Subtitle on the menu that pops up. If you don't see the closed caption icon, click the More button at the bottom of your screen and select either Closed Caption or Show Subtitle, whichever shows up on your end. If the captions move too quickly for you, click the closed caption icon and select Show Full Transcript on the menu that pops up. If you need to change the size of the icon of the captions, click the closed caption icon and select Subtitle Settings on the menu that pops up. A slider bar will appear where you can adjust the size of your captions. Moving on into the agenda for the evening, you will see that we have a packed schedule. However, out of respect for your time, we will finish no later than 7 p.m. We will begin by continuing our brief introduction of this workshop and using the Zoom polling feature to find out who has joined us all today. Next, we will walk you through an overview of Delaware's Climate Action Plan, and then take a more in-depth look at sea level rise and possible actions to maximize resilience to it. Finally, as I mentioned before, we will have a live question and answer session where our presenters will answer any questions that have been submitted into the Q&A box throughout the night. Our workshop this evening has a variety of goals that we hope to accomplish in our limited time together. Goal number 1 is to provide an overview of the Climate Action Plan and its development process. Goal number 2 is to communicate how public input has shaped the planning process for the Climate Action Plan. Goal 3 is to provide an overview of how actions identified for maximizing resilience were created. And our fourth and final goal is to gather feedback on which actions to maximize resilience participants would like to see the state implement. This evening, we have several DNREC staff members who will be presenting information and assisting with the facilitation of the workshop. First, Dr. Robert Scarborough is the Program Manager of the Delaware Coastal Management Program and will be our first presenter this evening. He has worked on adaptation to sea level rise and climate impacts for the last decade and serves as the scientific expert on the Climate Action Plan coordination team. Ms. Maggie Pletta is a coastal resiliency planner with the Delaware Coastal Management Program and will be our second presenter this evening. She is the project manager responsible for the part of the Climate Action Plan focused on maximizing resilience. I've already introduced myself, Ian Yu. I'm a resiliency planner with DNREC's Climate and Sustainability Program section. I will be your facilitator this evening, and I am helping to develop the part of the Climate Action Plan focused on minimizing greenhouse gas emissions. Ms. Kristen Thornton is a planner with the Delaware Coastal Management Program and will be assisting me with facilitation this evening. And finally, Ms. Nicole Marks is a Coastal Management Fellow with the Delaware Coastal Management Program and will be providing technical assistance. So now that you've learned a little about us, we'd like to learn about you all as well. Throughout this evening, we will be using the Zoom polling feature to collect your feedback. So to get you familiar with the polling feature, we're going to do 2 quick polling questions. These questions, as well as all polls in tonight's workshop, are completely optional, and you do not need to answer any question that you do not wish. However, we certainly encourage your participation. Our first polling question to get to know you is this: where are you from? Our options are Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, or other. So I'll have Maggie open up the poll and we'll keep it open for about 30 seconds. So go ahead and submit your responses. Quite a number of them coming in right now. So we'll keep the poll open for about 10 more seconds. And I see most of the polling results are in now. All right, I'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So unsurprisingly, about 90% of those of you who are on the call are from Delaware, though we do have some people coming from Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, as well as some other states. All right. So our second question to get to know you is this: why have you joined us all tonight, and what organization, if any, are you representing? Are you a concerned citizen? Are you representing state or local government? You're representing nonprofit, a private business, or other? So I'll go ahead and have Maggie open up the poll and give you all about 30 seconds to answer this poll. So we have some good responses coming in. I'll go ahead and keep the poll open for about 10 more seconds. So keep on submitting those responses if you haven't done yet. About 5 more seconds. So if you haven't submitted, go ahead and submit something now. And I will go ahead and end polling and share the results with you all. So we have about 2/3 of you representing yourselves as concerned citizens. We're glad to have you on the call. We also have some good representation from state or local government and nonprofits. Others of the representation from private businesses, as well as those who signified themselves as representing some other entity. So thank you for helping us get to know you a little more. It's great to know who we have all here at the workshop. I'm now going to turn over the mic to Dr. Scarborough, who will be taking you through our first presentation this evening. So go ahead and take it away, Bob.
Thank you, Ian. Before we dive deeper into tonight's main topic of maximizing resilience to sea level rise, I would like to provide everyone a brief overview of the Climate Action Plan, specifically the purpose of the plan and its development. The Climate Plan will outline possible actions that minimize and maximize. So what do we mean by that? We want to minimize the emissions of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, methane, and industrial refrigerants into our atmosphere. These gases are the primary causes of the climate change we are currently experiencing. If you'd like to learn more about this part of the plan, you can view the recording of last week's workshops on mitigation, which will soon be posted on the website. Link to the web page where you can access the recordings has been added to the chat box. The plan will also include how we can maximize our resilience to climate change impacts. This is what we're going to focus on this evening, specifically on sea level rise during this presentation. Future workshops next week will address adaptation to other impacts of climate change. The biggest thing to understand about the plan is that it will be providing state agencies and others what are the steps that they can take to prepare the state for climate change. The workshop series will continue next week, and after reviewing the feedback we receive from these workshops, we'll begin drafting the plan. Once complete, the plan will be made public in the winter of 2021. Once the plan is released, it will help strengthen the different sectors of our state to help protect the economy, infrastructure, natural resources, and human health and safety. By addressing all aspects of life in Delaware, we hope to ensure the state is best prepared for whatever comes our way, including higher temperatures, sea level rise, and extreme weather events. To create the plan, we employed multiple methods to guarantee we gathered the most information and input. The plan builds on past efforts to address climate change and sea level rise in Delaware. In 2010, the Sea Level Rise Advisory Committee was formed to assess the impacts of sea level rise on Delaware and determine what can be done to address these impacts. The committee included representatives from government agencies, academia, nonprofits, community groups, and business organizations to ensure that the needs and concerns of all sectors impacted by sea level rise had an equal voice at the table. Their work resulted in the 2013 Sea Level Rise Recommendation Report. We reviewed the recommendations outlined in the report to identify what actions have been implemented and where additional efforts are still needed. The second guiding document was the 2014 Climate Framework for Delaware. This document was one of the outcomes of the previous administration's Executive Order 41 that instructed state agencies to prepare for climate change. The report included discrete actions each of the cabinet agencies could take to help them adapt to change. Many of these actions were implemented, but there are still some areas that need additional attention. Similar to the 2013 Sea Level Rise report, we reviewed the report's actions to identify areas where further effort may still be needed. Finally, we conducted a literature review of the climate action plans from other Mid-Atlantic and Northeast states to identify possible actions that were successful in those states. Our next step was interviewing the various agency experts to understand where they see climate change impacts and possible actions their agencies can take to address them. By conveying the information of the technical experts to agency leadership, we ensure that all proposed actions are viable and will address the needs of each agency and their stakeholders. Similar to the literature review, we spoke with other state resiliency programs to identify additional successful implementable actions. Also in the conversations, we identified possible actions where we could work on together to use our available resources as efficiently as possible. Finally, we reviewed peer-reviewed articles, documents, and other reports on sea level rise impacts and adaptations from universities and federal and international organizations. Lastly, we engaged our stakeholders, Delaware's residents and visitors. We did this through public workshops in March and online feedback forms. This current workshop series is a continuation of this effort to ensure that we are meeting the needs of the public and keeping everyone informed. Now that we have discussed the purpose of the plan and how it's being developed, I'm turning you over to Ms. Maggie Pletta, who will walk you through the impacts of sea level rise in our state and some of the proposed actions the state can take to prepare.
Thanks, Bob. Before I begin discussing the impacts of sea level rise this evening, I wanted to do a quick housekeeping reminder for any participants who may have joined us late. If you have any technical difficulties or questions, please use the chat box that can be accessed by the chat box button at the bottom of your screen, and send a message to all panelists and someone will be able to help you. For any questions or comments on the content, please use the Q&A box that can be accessed at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can during the live question and answer portion towards the end of the time we have this evening. Next, closed captioning is available and accessed via the closed caption box at the bottom of your screen. And a final a reminder that any obscene, inappropriate, or any kind of hate speech input into the Q&A box will be deleted and the person responsible removed from the workshop. We're going to monitor this very closely to ensure that the workshop is a safe and enjoyable experience for all participants. And finally, if you're only joining us via phone this evening, the presentation recording will be uploaded to the website within a week of tonight. And throughout the workshop, you can submit questions or comments via email at declimateplan@delaware.gov. Now that we have that little bit of housekeeping out of the way, let's move on to the meat and potatoes of tonight's presentation. Tonight's topic of concern is the impact of sea level rise to the state. We have prepared a short video about the causes and impacts of sea level rise. Give me 1 second and I'm going to switch over to that video for you.
Climate change has far-reaching impact.
Well, give me 1 moment. It looks like I have something. Let me stop that share. I apologize for that. Ooh. 1 second.
Climate change has far-reaching impacts on the state of Delaware.
I apologize, folks, about that. I had items on that screen I didn't realize that were blocking your video.
Climate change has far-reaching impacts on the state of Delaware, and one of the greatest impacts we face is rising sea levels. Delaware has the lowest average elevation of any state and has already experienced over 1 foot of sea level rise at the lowest tide gauge since 1900. By 2050, sea levels will rise an additional 1 to 2 feet, and by 2100, up to 5 feet. Sea level rise is occurring in Delaware because of subsidence and climate change. Subsidence is the sinking of the land and has occurred since the end of the last ice age, when the large glaciers retreated to the poles. As the global average temperature increases, oceans become warmer, causing them to expand. Additionally, as land ice melts, more water is added to the oceans, increasing their overall volume. While at first glance it may seem that sea level rise will only affect coastal communities, in reality, the impacts are much farther reaching. From transportation infrastructure to the economy, all sectors will experience the effects of sea level rise. Most of the water used for drinking and irrigation below the canal comes from groundwater supplies. As sea levels rise, groundwater may experience saltwater intrusion, making it unusable for consumption and for use on farm fields. However, some of the greatest impacts will be on our wastewater and transportation infrastructure. By necessity, most wastewater treatment facilities are located along waterways that will experience higher water levels, leading to flooding. Raw sewage could be released if these facilities flood. With higher water levels in the rivers, storm sewers may back up, causing overflows throughout the system. Roads and bridges will be affected throughout the state, with up to 5% of all roadways becoming inundated. Roadways in Sussex County and along the Route 9 corridor are expected to experience the highest impacts. Damage and loss of roadways will shape both the safety of our citizens and the economy. The challenges of sea level rise may sound daunting, but if we work together now to adapt, we can ensure a safe, livable, and economically vibrant state. Join us throughout the Climate Action Plan process in 2020 to make your voice heard and help strengthen the state's response to sea level rise.
Hey, Maggie, just so you know, you were on mute.
Oh, goodness. It's always the tip of coming back and forth. Thank you, Nicole, for letting me know. I greatly appreciate it. So now that we've seen that video, we're going to go through a little bit more of the impacts. As you heard, sea level rise is already occurring in our state and is projected to continue. Before we discuss possible adaptation actions that the state could take, we're going to dive a little deeper into some of the sector-specific impacts of sea level rise. The first sector we will discuss that we will see impacts is our agricultural community. According to a University of Delaware study, agriculture adds annually about $8 billion to the Delaware economy. So any disruptions to this sector would have wide-reaching ramifications for the state. One way that sea level rise could impact agriculture is through saltwater intrusion into the groundwater used for irrigation. This intrusion can result in a loss of available irrigation water, which can result in higher costs to farmers to access usable water. Another impact is saltwater inundation onto agricultural fields. As sea levels rise, coastal farms may lose tillable land due to more frequent flooding, and it reduces the health of the soil due to the increase in salt content. The next sector we're going to discuss is human health. People can be impacted both emotionally and physically from rising sea levels. Emotional health can be diminished in a variety of ways. Areas that experience frequent nuisance flooding can strain the emotional well-being of a person because of the continued need to replace belongings and repair or adapt homes with the worry that eventually the home may become unlivable. Additionally, for individuals and families that make a decision to move, they can lose the sense of community and connection they had with their neighbors and friends. This loss of connection can cause harm to their emotional well-being. Physical health can also be damaged because of the risks involved with more frequent nuisance flooding. Flooding of homes and other buildings can lead to higher rates of mold production that harm the respiratory system. In coastal areas, flooded septic systems may fail. Additionally, areas with increased nuisance flooding of roads create unsafe driving conditions if individuals decide or have no other option to drive through the flooded roadways. This brings us to our next sector, infrastructure, represented by the roads, bridges, and rail lines of the state, as well as all water control structures. According to the 2013 Sea Level Rise Vulnerability Assessment, about 5% of all roadways and bridges in the state are located in areas that could be inundated under the high end of sea level rise projection of around 5 feet. To put this into perspective, that means approximately 484 miles of roads could become inundated under the highest scenario if adaptations are not taken. Sea level rise would directly affect travel as a result of flooding, inundation, erosion of road bases, removal of sediment around bridge abutments and piers, and reduced bridge clearance. According to the same report, approximately 4% of railway lines in the state are located in areas where they could be impacted by sea level rise. The resulting impacts could include periodic flooding, long-term inundation, and erosion if adaptation actions are not taken. Water control structures of concern are dams, dikes, and levees that can be found throughout the state. These structures are typically made of earth and other materials. While many were originally built to power mills or to create arable agricultural land, today they increasingly serve as flood control structures protecting humans and infrastructure in flood-prone areas. Dams and levees are impacted on a daily basis from wind, waves and tides, and other natural forces that can weaken or damage the structure. Sea level rise could exacerbate these existing impacts, which could hasten their need for repair and replacement. According to the 2013 Sea Level Rise Assessment, at the highest sea level rise scenario, up to 78% of these structures could be impacted by sea level rise if adaptation actions are not undertaken. The next sector that we can be impacted in our state are our natural resources. The typical Delaware beach includes a berm, or the beach area where recreation occurs, and a dune system. It is a dynamic system, meaning it is constantly changing and moving due to wave action, wind, and coastal currents. However, as sea levels rise, shoreline erosion can increase, and due to development directly behind the dune line, the dune system is unable to migrate, creating a narrow strip of beach between the dunes and the shoreline. Without taking adaptation actions, coastal communities may become more susceptible to flooding during coastal storms that impacts roadways, homes, and businesses. Damage and loss of these areas that are major tourism attractions would have far-reaching impacts on our economy. According to a report from the Delaware Tourism Office in 2018, Delaware's tourism industry brings in $3.8 billion in gross economic product each year. Loss of the tourism revenue from our beaches would have a direct impact on the state's economy. Our coastal wetlands are also likely to be impacted by sea level rise. By their very nature, wetlands are in low-lying areas on the boundary between land and water. They provide a variety of benefits, including habitat for commercially important species, the removal of sediments and other pollutants from our waterways, and protection against storm surge and flooding. According to the 2013 Sea Level Rise Assessment, between 97% and 99% of our coastal tidal wetlands could be lost due to sea level rise if they're unable to migrate landward or accrete. Accretion means the buildup of sediments that increases the elevation of the marsh. Just like dune systems, wetlands naturally migrate landward over time to adjust in water level. However, if there are structures directly behind the wetland areas or sea levels rise too quickly, wetlands are unable to keep pace. If these areas are reduced or lost, the benefits they provide will be lost as well. The final resource we're going to discuss this evening that can be impacted by sea level rise are freshwater riverine habitats and drinking water intakes. The Delaware estuary is an example that we have of a bay in our state where there's a mixture of fresh water and salt water. The fresh water comes from our rivers and streams that empty into the Delaware River and the bay. These rivers and streams are important habitat for recreational and commercial fish species. As sea levels rise, salt water can extend further upriver into these freshwater habitats, impacting the types of species that are present. Some species may be able to move upriver, while others cannot due to the body design or waterway structures that block their path. Saltwater intrusion uprivers can also be a problem for the drinking water supply in Newcastle County, where the primary source is surface water. A change in salinity levels near an intake pipe can impact the quality and reliability of fresh water for thousands of residents. If changes to these intake pipe locations or filtering is required, the cost may be substantial. Now that we've covered the causes of sea level rise and what is at risk, we will now discuss ideas the state can take to adapt to reduce the impacts of sea level rise. As Bob mentioned before, we reviewed a variety of resources and spoke with a cross-section of experts to identify possible actions that can be taken to help the state adapt. This work led us to come up with 7 overarching recommendation categories that each contain multiple actions. I'm going to go through each of the proposed recommendation and actions with implementation examples. Please note that the implementation examples given here are to demonstrate possible actions agencies might take. For each recommendation category, there will be a short, anonymous poll to gather feedback on which actions you think are the most important for the state to implement. That means there will be a total of 7 polls this evening. If answering polls is not your thing, then feel free to submit questions, comments, and feedback about the actions into the Q&A box or at declimateplan.org. We will use the feedback you provide to identify which actions are most supported by the public and which actions would need additional review. The first recommendation category is that state agencies should update planning documents and outline agency actions and the management of resources. The actions are not listed in any particular order as we go through them this evening. The first action is related to updating agency strategic plans to incorporate the impacts of sea level rise into their decision-making process. An example of this, of how it can be implemented, is including information on how our state will prepare our historically and culturally significant structures to reduce damage or loss from sea level rise. The second action is the incorporation of sea level rise impact considerations in natural resource and agricultural management and restoration plans. The goal of this action is to ensure our state's natural and agricultural resources are managed and restored in ways that ensure they continue to thrive for future generations. An example of this is identifying and incorporating adaptation actions that can be taken to protect our coastal forests from saltwater inundation. This inundation can result in the direct death of trees, but it also makes trees more susceptible to other pests that can harm the tree and eventually cause its death. The third action is updating and creating asset management plans that outline long-term goals and decision milestones of when to maintain an asset and when the cost of upkeep outweigh the benefit of maintaining it. This can be applied to both natural assets like coastal impoundments and build structures. An example would be a plan that identifies when to stop maintaining a public trail in an area that is consistently flooded. Making these plans and decision points now will help save save the state money and focus budgets on investing in longer lasting improvements. The final action in this category is to update our emergency response and hazard mitigation plans to incorporate the impacts of sea level rise on current plans. An example would be reevaluate evacuation routes in the state to identify if some roads are no longer safely accessible during storm events because of the effects of the storm on top of already higher sea levels. Now that you know a little bit about the recommendation, we're going to launch our first poll. Once I launch the poll, a small pop-up box is going to appear on your screen, just as it did earlier. You can make the box larger for the longer statements by pulling it to the sides. You can make it a larger area. However, I'm sorry, it will not make the font any larger, which I apologize for. If you have any trouble with the poll, please send a message to the chat box and someone can provide you with assistance. Okay, so based on the list of actions and recommendation category, please choose all actions you think are the most important for the state to implement. I will launch that poll. And I'll leave the poll open for about a minute to give everyone ample time to respond. Okay, we see some good amount of votes coming in. I'm gonna leave it open for just a little bit longer. It seems like our responses are starting to slow down, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. If you weren't able to add in your input, please feel free to add it into the Q&A box so that we can have it. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And it looks like we have 84% support the natural resource and agricultural management restoration plans. And there's also a pretty decent amount of support in the management plans for long-term maintenance, repair, and decommission decisions, as well as updating our emergency response and hazard mitigation plans. So thank you all for your great feedback. So our next recommendation category is to update and change some of the state's current regulations or policies to incorporate updated data and resource vulnerabilities. Again, please note that the implementation examples given here are just to demonstrate potential actions agencies might take. The first action is to update current agency policy and guidelines to incorporate the impacts of sea level rise. An example would be updating the risk management plan requirements of chemical waste generators to include how the entity will react and prepare for sea level rise at their site. This could help reduce the possibility of the accidental release of contaminants into our waterways and soil. The next action is to explore and evaluate ways that the air quality permitting and regulatory process can be updated to include impacts of sea level rise. An example of this is reviewing sea level rise projections at a specific site when approving a new air quality permit. This review would ensure a structure is not built in an area at risk to sea level rise. The next potential action is to review the state's Coastal Zone Act regulatory process to ensure that all CZA permitted activities in the coastal zone include sea level rise considerations. The recent Coastal Zone Conversion Permit Act made sea level rise and coastal storm plan a requirement for proposed alternative industry uses at existing sites. However, this plan is not required for current or new permitted facilities under a standard CZA permit. This potential action would help ensure the safety of those who live and work close to these areas, but also increase the financial stability and resilience of the business. The next action is to develop a comprehensive wetland regulatory plan that helps protect and restore wetland habitats. As I mentioned before, wetlands are likely to be severely impacted by sea level rise, and when they are impacted and lost, the services they provide are lost along with them. An example action is to update the wetland maps to incorporate potential wetland migratory areas. This would help protect wetlands by identifying and protecting areas where they can migrate inland, while alerting landowners about the possibility of needlessly spending money to develop an area that may not be accessible to them in the future due to sea level rise. The final action in this category is to review and update shoreline regulations to reduce the risk to coastal properties and human safety. An example would be reviewing the current building setback line on the coast to ensure it is located where it is most effective in protecting both dune habitat and coastal structures. By reviewing and updating the line, if necessary, the risk of damage to property and human life is diminished, which not only saves money for the property owner, but also to the state. Those are all the actions for that recommendation. And now that you know a little bit more about them, we're going to launch our next poll. So again, I'm going to launch it, and please choose all actions you think are the most important for the state to implement. Or if you do not believe any of them are, you can choose no further action needed at this time. Okay, we have some answers coming in right now. Leave it open for a little bit longer so everyone gets a chance. Leave it for just a little bit more as the answers continue to trickle in a little bit. Okay, it seems that the answers have stopped coming in. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll. So it looks like there is about 93% of everyone on the call this evening supports the development of a comprehensive regulatory plan to protect and restore wetlands. There's also some support on changing the CCA regulation process, as well as reviewing and updating shoreline regulations to reduce risk to coastal properties. So thank you all for that. Before we move to the next one, I just want to do a quick reminder that any comments or questions should be submitted via the Q&A box, and the chat box is for any technical support issues. So just a good little housekeeping reminder. Our next recommendation is to support the monitoring and research of the impacts of climate change and adaptation actions. This work can be used to help guide decisions to ensure state resources are managed as efficiently as possible. The first action is to increase the number, let me pop that up, sorry about that. The first action is to increase the number of adaptation pilot studies to test various adaptation practices before recommending their large-scale implementation. An example is the installation of living shorelines, which are an alternate to traditional hardened shorelines to protect against erosion. These shorelines help to provide habitat for local species and may be more resilient to sea level rise. By installing them at a variety of sites that represent different levels of wave energy, sediment types, and water level, we can test their suitability for use by property owners as an alternate measure to protect against sea level rise. The next action is to continue and expand research, monitoring, and modeling of our natural resources. This is an important piece because the results can be applied to make fiscally responsible decisions that ensure the protection of our natural resources and the services they provide to our residents. An example is to continue studies on sediment accretion, or how much sediment is added to our coastal marshes. As I mentioned before, the ability of wetlands to accrete is an important indicator of their ability to survive on projected sea level rise scenarios. By studying the rates of this accretion, we can identify areas that may need restoration to help preserve the valuable services they provide. Our next action is to continue and expand research on the impacts of sea level rise to infrastructure and facilities. By understanding the impacts, adaptation actions can be taken now, as well as creating plans on how adaptation can occur in the future. An example is to study how sea level rise may damage drainage systems and what sort of adaptation measures and resources can be provided to prepare them for sea level rise. By being proactive now, some risks and costs can be avoided in the future. The next action is to review current research and monitoring methodologies. As sea level rise, how our environmental scientists are able to collect data may need to be adjusted to ensure both data accuracy and human safety. For example, if a method to observe marsh stability requires there to be no water on the surface, researchers may need to adjust their methods or planning protocols to ensure all data collected are an accurate representation of current conditions. The next action in this category is to continue and expand the impacts of climate change and sea level rise on human health and the cost of healthcare. As I mentioned before, both the physical and emotional health of our residents can be impacted by sea level rise. To be able to most effectively address these impacts, additional research needs to be conducted. For example, conducting a health impact assessment to determine the public health consequences of sea level rise. This would help prepare our healthcare providers to be proactive in their response. The final action in this recommendation is to create and maintain a water resource database for use in planning and permitting decisions. By having one comprehensive database to use, it could help streamline the permitting and decision-making process, saving resources and time. For example, this database could contain the locations and condition of all water level monitoring sites and wastewater treatment outfalls to help decision makers identify facilities most at risk to sea level rise and to take action now to help them adapt. So with that, we're gonna go ahead into our next poll. Before I launch it, I just wanna do a quick reminder of how we're gonna be using your feedback in the planning process. We'll be using it to help identify which actions are most supported by the public and which actions will need additional review. As before, when I open the poll, you can choose all, as many or as few as you like, of the actions you think that are most important for the state to implement. So I'm gonna go ahead and launch this poll for you. And I'll leave it open a little bit longer since there are a little bit longer statements for you to read through. Okay, we're having some good information coming in. And working, still coming in a little bit. It seems to be slowing down closer to the number we've had previously. I'll leave it open for just a little bit longer. I will also mention, I saw a question come in about if the poll results will be available, and they will be included in the workshop summary that will be posted on the website. So you'll be able to access and view the full results of the anonymous polling. So it looks like we've stopped having interest coming in. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So about 87% of everyone on this call supports the continue and expansion of research and impacts, infrastructure, and facilities. There's also a good amount of support to continue expand research, monitoring, and modeling of our natural resources, as well as developing a water resource database for use in planning and permitting decisions. So before we start our next recommendation category, I want you to let you know that it has the greatest number of actions because it is identifying ways that state agencies can provide support to communities and other stakeholders in the state to adapt to sea level rise and climate change. Okay, so there's going to be good, decent amount of them, but hang in there. And also a reminder that the implementation examples I'm going to be giving you are just here to demonstrate potential actions that agencies might take. The first action is the recommendation, the first action in this recommendation is to increase grant opportunities for communities to adapt, as well as update current grant programs to prioritize activities that actively consider the impacts of climate change and sea level rise in the plan. An example could be creating a grant program specifically for our frontline or environmental justice communities to help them adapt. These communities are often experiencing some of the worst impacts of climate change and sea level rise, but have the least amount of resources to adapt. When adapting to sea level rise, it is important that all actions identify ways to increase equity for adaptation in our state. Following along the same path, our next action is to support programs and initiatives that help our frontline communities adapt. Although this sounds similar to the previous example, this one is more focused on connecting and supporting the communities to learn about and use existing available resources. This action is all about building relationships and identifying opportunities for equitable adaptation. Our next action is to provide outreach, training, and tools to the public and government agencies to increase their understanding of the impacts of climate change and best practices of adaptation. Currently, there are a variety of organizations and resources available related to this action. So really, this is much more continuing to do the work and expanding opportunities when able. An example is incorporating sea level rise information into home ownership counseling and other housing-related communications. Making this information readily available will help home buyers make informed decisions when purchasing a home. Our next action is specifically looking at ways to help a vibrant agricultural community and industry adapt to climate change and sea level rise. An example of this is to incorporate information about near-term sea level rise projections in new communication materials and possible actions agricultural producers can take to adapt. By providing the information and having the conversations with our agricultural community, we can work together to identify ways to ensure the industry remains a strong part of the Delaware economy. Similar to the last action, we also want to provide outreach and tools to both our large corporate level businesses and our small local businesses that are integral to our state's character and economy. An example of this could be encouraging new businesses or current businesses looking to expand to build in areas that are more resilient to climate change and sea level rise. By helping business owners choose locations that have, locations with less risk to sea level rise, it can help reduce their costs and help protect them from future damage. The next action is to assist local governments with the updating and implementing of their ordinances and planning documents. Many municipalities have a small staff that may not have the time or technical knowledge to make the updates. One example of the support that could be provided is drafting model ordinances or plans that can then be reviewed by local leadership and adjusted to meet their specific needs. By doing the initial legwork and research into updates to ordinances, it helps reduce the burden on the limited staff so they can focus their efforts on implementing adaptation actions and other community issues. Similar to the last action, this one is providing the support and assistance to local governments and water suppliers to identify vulnerabilities and adaptation actions. As I mentioned before, sea level rise can impact our drinking water sources, water for irrigation, and wastewater treatment plants, all of which are vital to the health of our residents and our economy. An example of this is working with water suppliers who rely on surface water to identify areas of future concern and creating a plan now of how and when to make adjustments. By identifying problems now and being proactive, it may save money for both the supplier and the consumer. The final action in this recommendation is to support the insurance industry to adapt to climate change. At the national level, the insurance industry has started conversations on how climate change and sea level rise may impact how they do business. An example of what can be done here in Delaware is to support these conversations and encourage insurance providers to develop new technologies, practices, and business models that are responsive to the emerging risk. By working with the industry and encouraging possible changes, it can help protect the consumers both directly in limiting their risk and by ensuring the cost of insurance remains accessible to all of our residents. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I know it was a big recommendation category with a variety of action. Upside is that was our largest category, and the next three have a few, fewer actions. So we've gotten through the hard part of the evening. So as before, we're going to do I'm going to launch the poll so that you can choose which actions you think are most important for the state to implement. As this has much kind of longer statements, I'm going to leave it open for just a little bit longer so everyone has a chance to read through everything that is here. Again, if you need to spread it out so it's easier to read, you can pull the sides of the poll box to make it a little bit larger. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that. And we have a variety of answers coming in right now. Okay, you can see the answers are starting to slow down a little bit. I'm gonna leave it over for just a little bit longer since there are so many actions that are possible to read through. Okay, and it looks like we have about the same amount that we've been having responding for the other questions. So I'm going to go ahead and close it. If you didn't get a chance to add your feedback, feel free to add a comment into the Q&A box for us. So looking at the results, I see there's about 79% are supportive of assisting local governments and water suppliers to identify vulnerabilities and adapt now. We have about 72% of, we have about 72% of support for programs and initiatives that help our frontline communities adapt, as well as, kind of spread out, the same amount for outreach and tools to the public and government agencies, agricultural community, and it looks like pretty well, a lot of these actions are, something that are supported by those of you on the call tonight. So we're going to stop that. And with that poll, we are halfway mark and we only have 3 more polls to go. So you've made it through 4 of them, just 3 more. So if you need a little time to stretch or move around, grab a drink, now's the time because we're on the downward slope. Our next recommendation, although similar to the last one, focuses on outreach and providing education to the public and stakeholders on the impacts of climate change and possible adaptation actions. Again, these examples given here are just potential actions to demonstrate some activities that agencies may take. The first action is to produce communication tools and materials in English as well as alternate languages. The United States Census Bureau reports that between 2014 and 2018, 13% of Delaware's population spoke a language other than English when at home. This shows a need that when agencies are producing communication resources about the impacts of sea level rise and climate change, there is a need to provide it in languages other than English to ensure all residents of our state are reached and have the information they need to adapt to sea level rise. The next action is to tailor communication for specific target audiences based on the projected impacts that may directly impact them. An example of this would be to create communication products specifically for residents that are most vulnerable to health impacts from sea level rise. Through tailoring messages and resources, it ensures the right information is given to the residents who need it most. The final action in this recommendation is to increase opportunities for consumers to understand their risks and how insurance can help them prepare and recover. As I discussed earlier, sea level rise can cause damage to property and possibly increase risk to residents. So providing information to them about the issues is important to help them choose the insurance that is best for them. An example of how this can be achieved is by adding information about sea level rise impacts to the Delaware Department of Insurance's flood insurance webpage. By updating the webpage, consumers can access information that can inform their insurance decisions from one place instead of needing to view multiple web pages. As before, now that you know a little bit more, we're gonna launch the poll. Again, you're gonna be choosing from the list of actions all that you think are most important for the state to implement. So we'll go to, and there we go. Okay, we're having some good information coming in right now. Okay, answers are starting to slow down. We'll leave it open for just a little bit longer to give everyone an opportunity to respond. Okay, so we're going to end the polling. And so it looks like, the support is pretty well spread out between all three of the actions. Just a little bit more on creating targeted communication resources. So it's pretty well supported throughout. So before we go on to the next one, I just want to do a quick reminder that any comments or questions should be submitted via the Q&A box, and the chat box is for any technical support issues. That way we can keep things a little more organized and make our Q&A session a little more efficient. Our next recommendation category concerns updating facility infrastructure design and management plans to account for future climate and sea level rise impacts. Although this recommendation has only 2 general actions, it is because these actions can encompass a variety of implementation strategies and opportunities for state agencies to take to repair facilities and infrastructure. The first action is to prepare state facilities and equipment for climate change impacts and sea level rise. As I mentioned just now, this can be a broad action that could be implemented in a variety of ways. Some examples include incorporating sea level rise projections into siting decisions of new state buildings, updating phone lines to remote state offices to ensure good network connectivity, and working to identify possible future access issues to facilities. The incorporation of these types of considerations can help save money and reduce interruptions in state services. The second action is to update facility construction guides and manuals to account for climate change impacts and sea level rise. By updating design guides and manuals now, it can help protect buildings in the future from sea level rise, which could result in less damage to the buildings, saving the state money on repairs. So as I mentioned at the start, this recommendation category has the fewest specific actions. However, it is still an important recommendation to consider. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do just as we have before. We're going to have a poll to see which actions you think are most important to implement, or if no action is needed at this time. Okay, we'll see responses are starting to slow down a little bit, but we'll keep it open for just a little longer so everyone has an opportunity. Okay, and it looks like we're almost to the amount that have been responding this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And it looks like there is support for both of the actions, that, they're both seem to be equally as important that, that we consider as we move forward with this plan. So we will go on to our, we officially reached our final recommendation of reviewing we've reached our final recommendation, which is the reviewing and editing current administrative actions by state agencies. Again, just please note that the implementation examples given here are to demonstrate potential actions agencies might take. The first action is to increase state agency capacity to support adaptation to climate change and sea level rise through funding, staffing, and training. Many of the adaptation actions may need additional resources, as the current available resources may not be enough to implement some of the possible actions. Thus, identifying new resource opportunities will be an important piece to maximize resilience in Delaware. And the final action is the Delaware state agencies will act as a climate change adaptation leaders within the state and the region. While our state may be small, it provides many advantages, including close collaboration between agencies and our communities, and the ability to pilot new projects and ideas to maximize resilience. Through our work, we can provide valuable information to other states in the region to help build regional and national resilience for businesses, residents, and infrastructures. So we've reached our final poll of the evening. I just want to briefly remind you that we'll be using the feedback you provide us in the polls and the comments to identify which actions are most supported by the public and which actions will need additional review. So we will launch our final poll. And here we go. Okay, starting to slow down. We're almost to what seems to be the number of votes we've been getting this evening. So I'll leave it open for just a little longer. Okay, so it looks like we've had everyone chime in. So we're going to end the poll. And again, there's a little bit of no action needed at this time. However, there's a good amount of support to make us climate change adaptation leaders, as well as to identify ways to increase agency capacity. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that. And I want to thank you all for participating and providing your valuable feedback to help shape Delaware's how Delaware will maximize its resilience to sea level rise. I'm going to hand you back over to Ian, who is going to lead you in your next activity.
Thanks, Maggie. So as you just heard, we have identified a number of possible actions that state agencies can take to help Delaware maximize resilience to sea level rise. But we also acknowledge that we may have missed something that you believe should have been included. Unfortunately, due to large turnout of people to this virtual workshop tonight, we won't be able to host a live virtual discussion between participants and the DNREC team, but we still want to hear your ideas. So we are actually going to open up the Q&A box to gather your ideas for additional actions to maximize resilience to sea level rise. And I know a number of you have actually already submitted some ideas and comments, which is great, but we wanted to give space for others who may have been processing all the information as Maggie was going through it to also provide that type of feedback. Just as a reminder that in order to create a safe and positive experience for all workshop participants, we will not tolerate any offensive or inappropriate language, nor any kind of hate speech. So if any such language is used, it will be deleted immediately and the responsible participant will be removed from the workshop and unable to return. So now that we have established those ground rules, the Q&A box is open and waiting for your ideas. We will spend the next 5 minutes collecting your ideas for maximizing resilience to sea level rise. And while you all brainstorm those ideas, we're going to play a little background music to help get the creative juices flowing. So please type your ideas up in the Q&A box and I'll check back in with you in just a few minutes. So you'll hear the music slowing down, but don't worry, you still have another 2.5 minutes to give your ideas on how to maximize resilience to sea level rise. So keep those ideas coming. and I'll check back in with you in just a little bit. So we're coming down to our final minute. So if you have any last minute ideas that you'd like to get down, please put them into the Q&A box. All right, thank you all for providing all that great feedback and ideas into our Q&A box. We look forward to reviewing your ideas in greater detail after the workshop. If you are still typing up your ideas, don't worry, feel free to keep submitting them to our Q&A box and we'll be sure to take a look at them after our workshop. So we are now going to enter into our question and answer portion of our workshop where our presenters will answer as many questions as they can that were submitted into the Q&A box. As I mentioned at the beginning of the workshop, we may not be able to get to all the questions, but we'll go ahead and start answering them now. So Bob, let me go ahead and start with you. There's some questions that asked about what studies do we as the state rely upon in projecting future magnitude of sea level rise?
Yes, Ian. Back in 2010, when we did the first sea level rise impact study, we had a technical group that was formed that looked at all the models and data available at the time and came up with projections for the Sea Level Rise Advisory Committee to use. One of the outcomes of the advisory committee is that the state should, periodically update these values. So in 2017, we actually contracted with the Delaware Geological Survey at the University of Delaware to form a new technical advisory committee and to look at the models and the current data. They did that, came up with a slightly different approach than what we used before and looked at confidence levels for of sea level rise over the next 80 years. What they did is came up with three basically equations, so you could pick any time frame up to 2100 and see what the expected level was. So they had one level that there was a 95% confidence that it would reach that level or above, one that was a 50% confidence interval that it would reach that level above, and one that was 5% that would reach that level or above. The values actually came out very close to our original values. So for the 95% confidence interval at 2100, it was 1.71 feet or 0.52 meters. The intermediate intermediate was 0.99 meters or 3¼ feet. And then for our high level, it was 1.53 meters or 5.02 feet. So that's where that number came in. One of the questions was, have we considered the, greater ice melt that's happening, we're seeing lately in the Antarctic and Greenland. Like I said, that was done in 2017. So whatever data was out then, we will update this probably in around the 2022, a 5-year time span to see what extra data is out there and get, better results that we can use in our projections in the future.
Great, thanks, Bob.
Mm-hmm.
Maggie, I have a question for you. Someone asked a question about mentioning that they were concerned about allowing development in flood-prone areas. Is this something that the state has decision-making power over, or is, what can people do if they're concerned about development in flood-prone areas?
That's an excellent question, Ian. As we mentioned before, this is a plan for what state agencies can do. Delaware is a home rule state, which means decisions on development and zoning and ordinances are made at the local and county level. So if there are concerns about that, that's where the work would need to go in. And that's why the supporting communities and stakeholders section, one of the actions is to really support those local municipalities and counties to identify how they can make those updates and changes to ensure that building, is not put into flood-prone areas that could be impacted.
Thanks, Maggie. Another question came in saying that many people think sea level rise only impacts people along the coast, but many of areas of Delaware contain tidal water bodies that will be affected by sea level rise. How will we as the state, or what are some opportunities for educating everyone in the state on the widespread effects of sea level rise?
So although I didn't include it tonight as one of the example actions, another example that we could do is to create a comprehensive outreach strategy about sea level rise for all state agencies to implement. So that could be a possibility. There's also, opportunities to increase and include information about sea level rise in educational programming for students. So there's a variety of methods, but it's one of those that's going to be a consistent, working together to get the information out.
One last question that we have time for, and this could be, I think Bob may be the most appropriate person to ask this question to. Has the state done any studies on how much of our roadways or other infrastructure will be impacted by sea level rise?
Yes, back in our Sea Level Rise Advisory Committee, the coastal programs did an in-depth study of all state infrastructure, land uses, vulnerable population, and whatever. We do have that available. I think it's probably available on the Delaware Climate Plan website. If not, we can get it there. But it's a vulnerability assessment for the state at the different sea level rise scenarios that we use for that study, which again were 1/2 meter, 1 meter, and 1.5 meters. I think the question was, specifically on roads, and I think at the high level it was somewhere around 9% of the roads in Delaware would be impacted by sea level rise.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Bob.
Yeah, there was a couple other questions I'll touch on because they're very short.
Absolutely.
One was, do we consider drought scenarios? That will be addressed next week in one of those workshops. And how periodically does the state inspect dams and levees? The Department of Natural Resources does have a dam safety program, which does inspections along with the Department of Transportation. Many of the dams also are roadways. So the two programs kind of split their duties on that, with DelDOT mostly handling the ones that serve as roadways too, but they are, inspected periodically.
Perfect. Thank you, Bob. Unfortunately, we are at time. We can't ask any more questions live right now, but we will be consolidating and answering all questions from this evening in a single document on our website at declimateplan.org. You can expect that document to be up on our website by Friday, October 16th. So if we didn't get to your question tonight, don't worry, we will be sure that we are capturing your question and answering whatever questions that we are able to do. So if you're still typing up questions in our chat box, go ahead and continue doing so, and we'll be sure to capture that in our document as well. So as we wrap up this workshop, we just have a few final remarks and next steps that we wanted to share with you all. The workshop recording, along with a closed caption transcript, will be made available on our website, declimateplan.org, in the coming days, and the question and answer document soon after. We have 2 more workshops coming up in our Climate Action Plan virtual workshop series. Next Tuesday, September 29th, we will be looking at possible actions to maximize resilience to increase temperatures. And next Thursday, October 1st, we will have our final workshop where we'll be looking at possible actions to maximize resilience to heavy precipitation and flooding. Both workshops, like tonight, run from 5:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. and registration is required to attend. So if you've not registered yet, again, go to declimateplan.org to do so. Our virtual workshop series will end next week, but we will continue to collect feedback on Delaware's Climate Action Plan through Friday, October 16th. Feedback can be provided through our interactive online survey, which is a lot of fun to take, and through our comment form. Both of them are available on our website. For more information on providing feedback through either the survey or the comment form, visit our website. I'm going to sound like a broken record here at declimateplan.org. Finally, carrying out virtual workshops is something that is actually new for us, so we are always on the lookout for ways to improve. Within 24 hours, you will be receiving an email with a brief 5-minute questionnaire that will ask you how you felt this workshop went and how we can improve. You can either fill out the feedback form for this workshop specifically, or you can fill out the form after you've gone through all the workshops you plan to attend. Either way is fine, and we just are very interested in hearing your feedback. So we hope you take the time to complete this form, and we are actively working on improving our workshops, and we will even use feedback we receive in between workshops to improve the remaining workshops in the series. So thank you so much for joining us this evening and for providing us with all your valuable insights and ideas. Please keep connected with us on our website, by email, and by social media. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we look forward to connecting with you soon. Have a great night, everyone.